What's going on, everybody? Today I want to talk about the new bonus chest as well as loot goblins. The bonus chest is going to be found in dungeons, and loot goblins will be found a lot of places, but I want to talk about how impactful they actually are because I've been farming a bunch of dungeons. Let's get into it. So the first thing I want to talk about is loot goblins here, and the reason why I want to talk about this is because they did get that bonus chance to drop legendaries now, which is extremely important. Most of the time you're going to find these in the open world, just randomly running around farming like I'm doing right now, or farming in a specific spot. There's a few other places that you can see them. One of the places is dungeons. Another place is Elder Rifts, and more specifically in Elder Rifts there's a modification to Elder Rifts which gives you a bonus chance of dropping a bunch of loot goblins, which could potentially be one of the best Elder Rift modifications now because loot goblins will drop legendary items. Now I've killed about 6 of them, and I've recorded some and I've not recorded others, and based on what I've seen is it's about the same drop rate based on what I've seen as well as other people have sent into me, about the same as an orange monster so far, which is actually really good. Now, for those of you that don't know, what I've seen from orange monsters is about a 15% drop rate for a legendary, excluding the first one of the day, which is a very good drop rate, and loot goblins are around that mark. Now, this could have just been the sample size that I have is very lucky, and we just happen to get them. And by the way, the sample size that I had was running Treasure Hunter, and so that might have played into something. Again, I have no idea what the numbers are, just from our experience. So these things are definitely worth chasing down and definitely worth going after and trying to find your legendaries. And this will absolutely massively buff the drop rates for legendary items for you in these areas, especially in open world farming, because one of the best ways to get legendary items is open world farming, and this will just make it so much better, like just that much better with the loot goblins. It's basically like adding another orange spawn, because loot goblins spawn about the same rate, maybe even faster or more commonly than orange elites, especially in some areas. So definitely an amazing buff. And then on top of this, I've been testing a ton of dungeons out recently. And so first off, I want to talk about the new modification where you can run in with less than 4 players down to 2 or 3 players. And I'll just showcase what a dungeon run like that looks like, because I've been running a few of them myself. So behind me, you'll see the dungeon run I was running with. This happened to be 3 players. I've run a couple with 2 players. And of course, I've run a bunch with 4 players trying out the new dungeon bonus chest, which, by the way, spoiler, it is amazing. Really nice bonus to dungeons. Now, with 2 and 3 player dungeons, there's no downside per se to the update. What I mean by that is, like, we have this feature that's in the game that it wasn't there before, and it doesn't harm any other feature in the game. And so this is pure gravy, meaning this feature is absolutely no downside to this feature. However, there are major criticisms that I'd like to make about this feature, because after testing it with myself and a couple other players, the 3-player party dungeons as well as the 2-player party dungeons are very elongated compared to the 4-person dungeons. Why? Because it's literally the same dungeon. You're just running it with 1 or 2 less people. Now, for players like myself, as well as the people in our clan, we oftentimes have some of the more grind heavy players, as well as the people who are spending a little bit. So we are a little bit ahead of the game. These are not necessarily mostly free to play players, but we do happen to have someone in here that is free to play, and it wasn't that slow. So when we were running a 4-person dungeon, the times ended up being about that 2-minute 30 mark. And then if you're running a 3-player dungeon, it was around that 3-minute 20-second mark. And then a 2-player dungeon would have been around that 4:15 mark. So almost double when we drop down. Obviously, it kind of makes sense. Half the players, about double the time. So yes, you can run them. And yes, that's nice, but you're not going to run them quickly. And that's the problem, is that oftentimes, the reason why we wanted lower player dungeons, at least for me, was that I didn't want to spend time in the find party queue, or I didn't want to spend time going and finding a party or replacing members. Now, there's a nice method with this. For those of you that do like the find party feature, myself, I never use it because I have an active clan, and I'd rather just grab someone from there that I know knows how to run the dungeons and things like that. But you can actually start up a dungeon as 2 or 3 players, and then go ahead and run through and sit in the party find queue so that people can join in when you go ahead and to go through the dungeon. So that's nice, and that's a really nice feature for you to bump up those 2 and 3 player runs. It does really well in terms of making sure that you can at least run the dungeons, right? Because before you couldn't. So that is a nice bonus. But that bonus chest, as you saw there, my character, I typed out no chest because there was no chest at the end because you can't open it without 4 players. And so I'm going to go ahead and jump into that and showcase a few of the chest runs as well as what my experience with them is so far. So I'm going to drop on screen just a couple of my runs, including the one that I got a set item in. So what this means for all players out there, I've run about 30 or so dungeons in the span of about 2-3 hours, and I've run many more outside of that. In total, I've probably run about 50-60 dungeons. I didn't really keep track of all of them, and I've opened the chest in 50 or 60 of those dungeons. I've also run about 30 or 40 outside of that group where we're running the group dungeons. Obviously, it was just a couple of people, so we couldn't open the chest, but based on what I've seen, the dungeon drop rate for set items is exactly the same. Now, keep in mind, if I pull up the codex right now, Mad King's Breach is boosted, and that's what I've been running. And I've been just claiming my points as I go along and just playing the game as I do. And I ended up getting about the same drop rate from these dungeons as I was getting before. Now, the bonus to this is that the bonus chest now drops set items, and from what I've seen out of the drop rates, it is exactly the same as the dungeon itself. So this is basically double dropped dungeons because of this bonus chest. So what this means even further is that not only did they make it so that you could not run the dungeon solo, they made it so that the dungeons are as hard as 4 players, but then they also gave a buff to 4-player dungeons where you get twice the drop rate now, which is absolutely absurd. For one, this is a really nice hidden buff because they just said it's a bonus chest, and my initial thought was that it's going to be an ornate chest, which it is, but that ornate chest actually contains legendaries and set items, which is a huge bonus in terms of farming your set items. Now, from what I've also experienced of these dungeons is that the set items that drops in the chest is exactly the same set items in the dungeon itself. So if you're going to run Mad Kings for, your gloves that is in Shawl Boss, if you drop a gloves from the chest, I think I did so in the clip that I showed where I dropped the set item, you're going to get Shawl Boss gloves. That's what it is. It's going to be the exact same as that set, or the dungeon rather, that drops that set, which is absolutely massive for anyone that wants to farm set items out there. This is a good change for those of you that wanted boosted drop rates. Not only that, but it's also an amazing change just in general, because you also can get more legendary items. However, it also kind of calls into question once again, why did they make 2- and 3-player dungeons exactly the same difficulty as 4-player dungeons? Because it's so clearly better to go run 4-person dungeons that you're going to want to do it anyways if you can. So I don't understand why they go and make these 1- and 2-player, or rather 2- and 3-player dungeons as difficult when they could just make it, 2 times drop rate in those and make it as difficult, or just make it so it scales with the amount of players. Like, let's say you have 2 players, well, then the boss's HP is about half compared to 4 players, and then the dungeon drop rate is basically halved because you don't get access to the bonus chest. I'd really like to see this change made in the game. I really don't see any reason for it not to be in the game because, again, as I've mentioned several times already, the dungeon drop rates from the chests and the dungeons equate to about double what it was before. So again, this is all boosted dungeon drop rates. If you farmed non-boosted dungeons, let me know in the comments down below if you've noticed a similar experience. But I will say that this is an amazing change. And honestly, if you watched my previous video yesterday, you'd have known that my kind of sentiment on the patch was a little bit down compared to what it was initially, but this has brought it way back up because dungeons are the most annoying things. And one of the things I've been trying to farm a bunch because I want to go ahead and experiment with all these new set items for you all to showcase them so that you know what set items that I think are very strong, and you can clearly see it in the videos, and then you can go farm it yourself because it does take 6 to 7 hours to farm out a 6-piece set over the course of all these dungeons. So before I end this video, actually, I just wanted to add one thing really quickly. This sample size is on the smaller side of things, so again, I could have just gotten pretty lucky, but we'll have to see from your all comments down below. I'd like to hear them because you may have all had different experiences than I, and we still need to run a bunch more before it's guaranteed to say, hey, it's double drop rate. So just want to add that in there before I end the video. Hopefully this gives a huge improvement towards people wanting to run dungeons, as well as just overall a nice experience, because the drop rate was pretty atrocious before. Let me know what your thoughts are in the comments down below, and I will see you for the next video.